Hello and welcome to Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer. I'm Ann Hess. The pork industry is celebrating Earth Month by demonstrating how real data from real farms can paint a promising picture for both retailers and producers. Farm level data from recently released 2022 sustainability report highlights practices helping protect freedom to operate and secure pork's place on the retail shelf. Joining us to discuss this topic and more is Jamie Burr, Chief Sustainability Officer with the National Pork Board. Welcome, Jamie, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you for having us on the call today.
Before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to remind the audience tuning in you can post your questions at any time in the chat, or if you're tuning in via social media, please post those there in the comments. So, Jamie, why don't we start by having you give us a brief overview of the 2022 sustainability report and specifically where this data came from and maybe a few highlights?
Absolutely, Ann. Thank you. This data is an aggregated data set from 225 farms that represents 170,000 acres and just over 3 million pigs. And if we look at that year over year, one of the greatest success stories from my perspective this year is that represents a doubling of the number of producers and the number of pigs that's represented in the report. And this allows us just to continue to build that data set to where we have on-farm data that's aggregated from producers, and it's anonymous, so we're not providing individual data. We're aggregating that data up into one single report. A couple highlights from that I want to provide is, if you look on the farm, this data shows that pork producers are a net sink, or what I mean by that is they put more carbon back in the ground than they admit at the farm level. A huge story from a conservation perspective. The other one is that I thought was a big story to tell is there's 10,000 acres of that 170,000 acres that I described earlier that are in conservation practices. So if you think about that in terms of square miles, that's 15 square miles on that 225 farms. That's a lot of conservation practices that producers are putting on the ground.
It's a very significant number there. When we talk about freedom to operate at the industry level, how does this data contribute to that, specifically with supply chain partners?
So it's so important to share actual on-farm data, and that's where this comes from. It's not a book value. It's not a model. It is not data that comes from a detractor to this industry. It is from farmers that farm the ground every day, and it's able to tell a story using their data.
So you mentioned that aggregated data. How did the states use that?
So they're able to use it in a couple of different ways. I think most importantly is to just share the news within that state, just like I share with it from a national perspective. We can give those states a state report so that they can share their state level data with customers or with policymakers, so that they can prove how conservation minded producers are. They can also use it to share with the entire supply chain, whether it be corn farmers, and how we all work together to be able to reduce the outcomes from farming.
Let's talk a little bit about the farm level. I mean, you mentioned that data is confidential. How do producers use that then?
So one way that producers can use it is that's their baseline. It's their baseline data set, and then we're able to provide them then a report that says if they changed a practice, this is what their data would look like based upon changing that practice, whether it be implementing no-till or implementing a cover crop or implementing some type of edge of field activity. We're able to show them where they're at today and where they could be if they wanted to implement additional practices.
Very important to get those benchmarks to look at that data. We talked about April's Earth Month and Earth Day is coming up soon. What are some maybe tactical things producers can consider to improve environmental sustainability on their farms?
The first thing I want to say is just continue to pitch the idea of being part of this program. because this program allows us to take data and continue to bolster that data set so we can tell the good story of producers. So it starts there. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, we can provide them the report that says, based upon their own farm data, their specific condition at their farm, we could provide them with a report to give them some consideration so that they can decide based upon where they're at, what they want to do instead of somebody telling them what they should do with their land.
I know National Pork Board has a tool to help, strengthen market demand for pork, foster valuable partnerships with the supply chain, and elevate pork's reputation as both nutritious and planet friendly. How can a farmer get involved in the Pork Cares Farm Impact Report?
Sure. So the first and foremost is signing up and then just realizing how important it is going forward to continue to gain public trust. And think about it in terms of a formula of principles plus practices plus proof equals public trust. The principles are we care ethical principles. The practices are things like what practices do we put in place? There are things like how do we take care of our animals, whether it be PQA training or TQA training. And then the proof is that data set that completes the formula. So when we have data from a farmer, that flows into that public trust um, program.
Absolutely. As we wrap up our conversation here today, is there anything else you'd like to share on the sustainability efforts or the Pork Cares Farm Impact Report?
Just how important it is to consumers and our supply chain to provide them with data and proof points. Um, this allows us to tell story with science and with data instead of, again, using a model or using someone else's anecdotal information. When we can sit down with real data about real farmers, that tells a better story than anecdotal information does.
Real farmers, real data. Jamie Burr, National Pork Board, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this insight on farm level data and how it paints a promising picture for both retailers and producers.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you for your time and for uh, letting us tell the story of pork producers.
For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in today. For more coverage and conversations on pork industry related topics, be sure to check out the live and on demand section of Feedstuffs 365. For Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer, I'm Ann Hess.